Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and I'm reading Latifa, issue number 1. Now, I know you've probably never, ever heard of Latifa, except for Queen Latifah, of course, right? All hail the Queen. But the idea here is that this is a brand new comic. This was released not too long ago. Actually, I should have done this last week. I was just overwhelmed with the amount of comics last week. But this is a comic that is the first female Saudi Arabian superhero. Now, as I've mentioned in my podcast recently, podcast number 10, I used to actually live in Saudi Arabia for almost 5 years in this area, that area, another area, all over the place. And I'm very sad that I stopped staying there or visiting there since last year because just 2 weeks ago they had their very first Comiccon. And at the Comiccon, they released this comic. Now, the writers of the comic are Fahad Al Saud and Stan Berkowitz. Mr. Al Saud, he's actually a prince. And it makes sense because it's one of the only ways that I could see a comic like this getting out into the public. Authorized by the Saudi government, allowed, permissible. Saudi is making tremendous leaps and bounds. Just the idea they had a Comic-Con in the first place. But I think that one of the ways to make sure that this happened was because Fahad Al Saud, Prince Fahad Al Saud of the Al Saud royal family, Saudi Arabia. Yeah, that's actually where that comes from. Anyway, guys, more about the comic itself. Latifah is just this girl who this is maybe 100 years in the future. All sorts of bad things happen with climate change and wars and everything, and it's insane. And this young girl, she's abused and beaten up, and all sorts of terrible bad things happen to her. And what happens is that these mutants are developing from the east. So that's from the Persia area. Yeah, I know. It's a huge diaspora between the Saudis and the Persians. So yeah, it is what it is. Either way, so they're mutants coming from there, and they're just huge hulking. They literally look like Hulks with turbans. And they're coming in and charging and killing people. And Latifah pretty much says she's had enough. And she gets some help by an artificial intelligence sword that was created by Aramco. Now, if you don't know, Aramco, Saudi Aramco, is in the eastern side, the eastern seaboard of Saudi Arabia. Yes, there's actually water in Saudi Arabia. I know in America, people are like, wait, what? Yeah, it's actually surrounded by about as much water as America is. Anyway, so in Saudi Aramco, before it was destroyed, apparently. Wow, that's surprising. I was just there not too long ago. And yeah, this sword is intelligent, and it can go from a dagger to a full-length sword, and it's a wicked-looking sword, and it helps her keep tally of all. In fact, at the end, when she chops off the head of this one particular mutant, it says, "That's number 724, Latifah. Thank you, sword." And they move on from there. This is a very fun comic, and maybe a lot of it's just coming from myself because these places they're saying I recognize the name or I've been there, something along those lines. And yeah, it just either way, my own personal biases towards this sort of culture is completely aside from itself. This was a very fun comic. And apparently this is based on a video game. I honestly, I think it's just like an app video game that you can get on your phone. Not actually interested. I don't play games anymore. But this is based on that. And it's a company called Nam. Nam is actually the very formal way of saying yes in Arabic. And apparently they had all of this stuff put together for the Comic-Con and it was released. Guys, the only way to get this comic is on digital format, so I highly recommend trying to find it that way. I personally got it on Comixology, and it was only $2, and honestly, it's worth giving it a shot. I believe that you can look at 4 pages or so in a preview version. I'm not sure. I haven't not had Comixology for a while. Either way, I would honestly recommend checking it out. It is a very fun book, and it is going someplace, and I would like to actually see it advance further, maybe get some more comics out there. I mean, like, again, just like I said in podcast number 10, the culture of comic books is pervasive and it goes everywhere, and it's such a great way to bind everyone. I remember when I was in high school, there was no way that anybody would say comics would rule the world, but comics are currently ruling the world. #1 at the box offices. Even the Oscars have started to say, you know what, we've got to start paying some kind of attention. All right, guys, I'm going to give this comic a B. I want to give it higher, but I realize that I am a little bit biased towards it because of the love that I have for the culture that is now coming out of Saudi Arabia right now, and the idea that this is something that's actually happening. I'm also very sad that I missed Comic-Con over there, the very first one ever. Anyway, guys, Professor Bell, Comic Book University, class dismissed.